Hello everybody, my name is Rachel and welcome to my channel Kalanati. Today it's time to talk about some 2015 favorites, but not books in this video. I'm going to talk about favorite authors that I discovered and read for the first time in 2015. I've been tracking how many authors I discover each year for a couple of years now, and this is the first year where I have looked at that list and gone, wow, there are actually some real surprises there. I can't believe I've only been reading some of these people for a year or less. I feel like I've been reading them for a lot longer. So I have a handful, I have 7 that I wanted to tell you about. These are not ranked in any specific order. I just chose authors that 1, I had read it for the first time in 2015, 2, I really enjoyed their books, and 3, I had read 3 or more books by them. The first I have to mention is Mary Roach. She is the only author of nonfiction on this list, sadly. I do feel like I didn't read quite enough nonfiction in 2015, but Mary Roach is a gem. She is a gem, guys. I've read 4 of her books. I have read Bonk, which is about sex research, Stiff, which is about what happens to human bodies and cadavers after we die. Packing for Mars is about the realities of space travel, what it's really like to go into space. For example, the International Space Station is supposed to smell really funky. I don't think I'd enjoy being there. And the 4th one that I've read is Gulp, which is like a journey down the alimentary canal where you're exploring the whole process from your mouth down through your digestive system and then, you know, out the other end. I think Mary Roach is so amazing to read, and I will continue reading all of her stuff because she has this infusion of humor into everything. She tackles these subjects that make you kind of uncomfortable, like you wouldn't talk about that in polite company sometimes, but she does it both delicately but also rather bluntly in some cases. She will ask the awkward question that everybody wants answered, and I really love that. Next is Samuel R. Delany, who I have read 4 books by. I have read Babel 17, Dahlgren, which if I had a special category for most controversial book that I read in a year, it would be this book, Tales of Navarion, and most recently, Nova. I don't think I've rated any of his books higher than 4 stars. There's always this thing keeping me holding back from just all out loving each of his books. I highly respect that he wants to talk about a lot of controversial and sometimes uncomfortable subjects like gender and sexuality, and he does some very explicit things. Delany is such an intentional, beautiful writer. Even if you feel like you can't really get on board with the uncomfortable thing that he's talking about, you can still admire the writing. And even if you don't quite like the writing, you just have to dig into what he's talking about and go, that's unusual. I have never read something quite like that. He has melded these things. He has decided to talk about this very interesting subject in a different context than I have ever read it before. I think of all the authors I discovered in 2015, he's the one I have the most complicated relationship with because of that. I always feel like I am thinking and being stretched a bit more when I'm reading his books, even if I can't extremely highly rate them, because I am being held back a little bit. It's challenging, and I think that's probably one of the best things you can say about an author if you want to read them for something other than brainless entertainment is that you are engaged in what they're talking about and they feel like you have taken something away from it, even if it's just the experience itself that you'll never forget. For number 3 on this list, I absolutely have to mention Rosemary Kirstein. I read all 4 books that are currently out in her Steerswoman series, and I loved them. I think I gave almost every single one of them 5 stars. They just exactly my kind of thing. It is speculative fiction of the kind that I really love that blends the fantasy setting with science fiction. So you think that maybe you're in a fantasy world, and then you suddenly slowly realize that actually it's a science fictional world and the magic is actually technology, and it's so great. The only terrible thing about the series is that it's not finished yet. Books 5 and 6 are in the works, and oh, I didn't even think about this for my anticipated releases of 2016 videos, but if by any chance one of the next books comes out in 2016, that would be the greatest gift ever. Next is actually a duo because I didn't feel like I should separate them, and that is Ellen Kushner and Delia Sherman. I read 3 of the Riverside books, which are the ones currently out and finished. They are Swords Point, The Privilege of the Sword, and The Fall of the Kings. Ellen Kushner wrote the first 2 of those, and then she co-wrote with Delia Sherman the 3rd one. And I have read one thing solely by Delia Sherman, and that is her collection of stories, Young Woman in a Garden. And these 2 women, I just love the type of stories they tell and the type of fantasy that they write. The Riverside books are fantasy of manners with swords play and nobility and sometimes a little bit of ancient magic seeping into the world. This seems like an older, gentler, more mythical type of fantasy that they write, and with Delia Sherman's collection of stories as well. It's a type of fantasy that I associate strongly with family and my parents. It's a weird kind of nostalgia in a way because I'm nostalgic for the type of books and the type of authors that my parents have read and that have been sitting on their shelves for so long. So I think of Ellen Kushner and I think of Delia Sherman, and I also think of Border Town and Terry Windling and Will Shetterly and Emma Bull and all these people who wrote for Border Town that I've been seeing on my parents' shelves for so long. And now I'm finally reading these authors on my own as an adult, and it's kind of magical. I'm getting way off the point here, which is I really enjoyed reading these 2 lovely ladies' books this year. One of the series that I read in its entirety in 2015 was The Hyperion Cantos by Dan Simmons, and for those 4 books alone, he must make this list because that is some excellent science fiction blended with many other genres and many fantastic ideas. I'm going to repeat what I said a couple weeks ago when I finished this series. I am so impressed and so amazed at Simmons' ability to tell this story over such a long period of time and over 4 books and make it feel like it all fit together, like it was all planned out, like he didn't just suddenly come up with an idea in the middle of the series and go off in a different direction. It was all intentional and planned, and I can't believe that so many of my questions were answered by the end. I was really expecting there to be a bunch of things that just aren't explained, that are just part of the world building you don't need to know, and he took the time to wrap everything up. It was well thought out. It was just such good plotting. It seems like Simmons writes across a variety of genres, which is really exciting actually. While I would love for him to write nothing but science fiction because that's my jam, I'm excited also that there are other things I can explore by him. I probably will stay away from any of his stuff that veers on horror territory. I'm not one for horror or suspense, but the Ilium Olympos duology is probably what I'll pick up next, and people have recommended it to me, so I am excited for that in 2016. The next to last author that I have to mention on this list is the biggest surprise to me because I had totally forgotten. I had never finished a book by him until 2015, and I have to thank Jane from Yes Miss Jane for giving me a bit of encouragement and a bit of a push to try Neal Stephenson again, because I have never regretted it since I finished reading Snow Crash in think back in February of this year. I've read 6 of his books in 1 year, and they're not really short books, they just keep getting bigger and bigger, and my absolute favorites by him, 5-star books both, are Anathem, and the other 5-star book I read by him was, of course, Seveneves. If I had to pick one thing about Neal Stephenson as an author that I really like, I have to say that it comes down to his books that are more overtly science fiction. Stephenson seems to really exult in how science and technology can help us, and you can feel in his writing, in these stories, and especially in Seveneves, I should be holding that one up instead, especially in Seveneves, that he finds an idea that he thinks is so cool, he just has to share it. He has to research the heck out of it and explain it in almost tedious detail, and it's because he loves the ideas. It's kind of a positive science fiction. Yeah, the world may be destroyed in Seveneves, but we rebuild, we remake ourselves, and it turns out okay. The 7th and final author for this video is Elizabeth Moon, and it's a little bit of a cheat. Please forgive me this one, because the first book that I actually read by her was The Speed of Dark, and it was one of the very last books I read in 2014, and I kind of forgot that I had read it in 2014, but I'm gonna count her for new author in 2015 because I read 2 complete series by her this year, and definitely it was like the year of Elizabeth Moon. The first was the 5 books in the Vada's War series, and the second was the 7 books in the Serrano Legacy series. Definitely Vada's War was my favorite. These series are both military science fiction / space opera, and they both follow stories about women in positions of command or background in command or with military training in space fleets. I definitely think that for me, the highlight of Moon as an author are a couple of things. She is a woman who has experience, I think, in the Marines herself, and she writes women in command, women in military situations, and I just eat that up. It's really interesting that she has that personal experience. I also think that she really explores this line of when civilian life meets military life, and she has a lot of characters who end up on the opposite side of that line than they expected to, and their struggles with trying to step into one or the other of those roles when that is not what they want or not what they are used to. And so comparing those types of lives, the civilian life versus the rather strict command structure of the military, is something, I have no personal experience with that, but that it comes up so much in her stories and draws attention to itself. I find that very interesting to read about. It turns out that Elizabeth Moon has a lot of other books out there as well. She's got a rather large bibliography, and she also writes fantasy, so I will definitely be reading some of her fantasy, probably the Paxenarian series. I'm not exactly sure if that's the name of it. That is definitely going to be read in 2016. And she has a couple of possibly standalone science fiction novels that are also on my immediate TBR. Those are my 7 favorite authors that were new to me in 2015. If you've read any of these and you want to squee about them as well, please comment and also tell me who is your favorite author or authors that you discovered in the past year. Let's chat, and I'll talk to you guys again in my next video. And until then, bye.